In today's video, we're once again taking a look at some off-season speculation, taking a look at the Vancouver Canucks. We have a lot to discuss on the Canucks this evening. Could we see a Tampa Bay Lightning Montreal Canadiens trade this off-season? And we also want to take a look at the futures for goalies Matt Murray and Braden Holtby. We'll jump into all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of teams I want to talk about today. Let's kick things off with some training camp news and notes from Pittsburgh and Washington, taking a look at some goaltenders and their futures. Let's start with Pittsburgh and Matt Murray. Now, as we've discussed here numerous times, Matt Murray is a potential victim of a salary cap crunch, and there's a high probability, at least I feel, that he will be traded when the offseason kicks into high gear. Him and Tristan Jarry both need new contracts. Pittsburgh, like many other teams, are going to be very tight up against the cap. Jerry's clearly going to be the cheaper one to sign, and at the same time, you could probably argue he's been a better goaltender over the past season as well. Murray seems to have lost a step or two since they last won the Stanley Cup, and even though he has a couple Stanley Cups to his name, I think right now it might be more wise for the Penguins to stick with Tristan Jarry and then move along Matt Murray sometime this offseason. And so far in training camp right now as they prepare for their play-in series against the Montreal Canadiens, right now Jarry looks to be the better, stronger goaltender. He looks to be more ready, more prepared, whereas Murray certainly has had his training camp struggles during their scrimmages and other play here so far. Of course, the Penguins have had other issues too. Not to say that they won't be ready in prime for Montreal. There's been a lot of talk about both teams so far during their training camps, but I do think the Penguins will have a clear-cut edge to win that series. And there's a pretty good chance we could see Tristan Jarry take the reins here as a starting goaltender, and which will just increase the likelihood that much more of Murray being moved during the upcoming offseason. So even though we've talked about him a lot as a potential trade target in the past, I just want to mention how things are going in camp, which will likely have a big impact on his future. These playoffs will dictate the futures for many NHL players fighting and struggling for cap space due to the flat cap we're going to see here over the next few years. Now, in their rival in Washington, Braden Holtby is facing a similar situation. He's on an expiring contract, and he has a young up-and-coming goaltender in Ilya Samsonov ready to take over his starting position as well, which will save the cap some cap space, clearly, as he will be on his entry-level contract for a couple more years. And Holtby, at this stage of his career, would probably have ideally wanted one more longer-term contract for a decent amount to kind of get him to the latter stage of his career. But that might not be possible now, given the new landscape of the NHL, as we've discussed here. So many teams are going to be tight, and even getting any kind of contract out of Washington might be very difficult. And obviously, this could be his last run, his last hurrah, if you will, with the Capitals this postseason run. So obviously he'd like to win another championship if at all possible. I'll show you some quotes here from a recent quick interview with Braden Holtby on the situation. Basically saying right now he's not thinking too much about the contract. He's just focused on winning another championship. And then next year he'll have to decide where he feels is the best fit again for a potential championship. So it seems like he's kind of coming to grips with the fact that his time in Washington is slowly coming to an end. This could be the last run here, and we'll see if he can make the most of it. But clearly, Braden Holtby is going to be one of the bigger name free agents that hit the market, especially in goaltending. There's going to be a numerous amount of players looking for new deals, him being one of the top guys out there. So it's going to be interesting where he ends up. There's going to be a fair bit of teams, I think, looking for goalies too. Just a matter of where he can fit cap-wise. Unfortunately, a lot of these stronger teams around the league are going to be struggling for cap space, so he very well might end up having to take a contract with a team that's lower in the standings, but he could certainly have a big impact on helping them improve here over the next year or two. But I see Holtby likely taking a short-term contract. Now, next up, I want to take a look at the Tampa Bay Lightning and some possibilities that we might see. And could we even see a deal between Tampa and division rival, the Montreal Canadiens? Now, of course, as we know, Tampa Bay is like many teams that we've already talked about here, and others around the NHL are going to be really tight for cap space. They got some young RFAs needing some pretty good contracts that they've earned in Anthony Cirelli and Mikhail Sergachev. And they're going to have some cap casualties in Tampa. They've been able to skirt around this and get some players signed to some pretty team-friendly deals over the last number of years to keep the band together, but I just don't see that being nearly as possible this coming offseason. and somebody's going to have to go. If you look at the most logical group of players, you're looking at guys like Alex Killorn, Andre Palat, Tyler Johnson, Yanni Gourde. The only problem is that they've given out way too many no-trade clauses, as we've discussed in other videos, and Alex Killorn is the most likely one to be moved just due to the fact that his contract for the coming year provides a little bit more flexibility, where he only has a form of a modified no-trade clause. Now, I came across a report earlier today kind of wondering if Killorn might be a good fit with Montreal. Now, I don't have any rumors to suggest that they've had talks or that certainly anything in the works by any means, but just some speculation on would Killorn be a good fit in the Habs organization. Of course, Alex Killorn, even though he's played his entire career in Tampa, prior to that, he went to Harvard University, but he actually is an East Coast Canadian. He was born in Halifax, Nova Scotia, grew up mostly, though, in Quebec, just outside of Montreal. So, kind of would be a going home in a way for him to go back and play for the Montreal Canadiens. Of course, I have no idea if he was ever a Habs fan growing up or what he cheered for in that regard. But either way, Killorn is a solid hockey player. Coming off a career year, he still has 3 more years of his contract right now, a little over $4 million. So it's pretty valuable for what you can get. I mean, he's got a lot of great experience to bring with him from Tampa, and obviously Montreal would be a team who could benefit from his services, in my opinion. I mean, he can be a pretty solid top 6 guy and give you 25 to 30 goals. He's a pretty responsible two-way player. Like I said, he's got some decent term for some good value on his cap here for the next few years. It's not that Tampa wants to move him. He certainly has not struggled at all. It's just a matter of, really being a cap situation that they need to deal with from a business perspective. Unfortunately, Tampa's kind of put themselves in a situation here where they kind of have a lot of contracts that are just tough to move because they painted themselves in a corner with no trade clauses to be given out a little bit too, recklessly, in my opinion. I mean, I think they should be reserved more so for, top line, top pair defensemen only, maybe a top goaltender. But some teams just giving them out way too easily here. So could Killorn be a good fit in Montreal? Now, if you look at the kind of trade this could be, makes sense that a guy like Killorn could be a draft day trade. And obviously Montreal is loaded with draft picks. Some people feel maybe that it could be a first or second round pick that all it takes to get Killorn. I mean, Tampa will likely push for a first rounder given the fact that he can be a 25 to 30 goal guy. But if they're not able to get that, maybe a second or a combination of 2 seconds or maybe a second on a prospect, something to that effect might be enough to get the deal done. And Montreal certainly has more than enough capable assets to do that. They're loaded on draft picks, especially, second, third rounders that they could certainly part with. They have some prospects that they can move along as well. They're not going to all be able to play in Montreal. They have one of the deeper prospect pools in the NHL. And if it means getting in, a really solid veteran guy who can play with them for the next 3 or 4 years at a good value here, I think that's a deal they should very much at least consider. They have some other wingers that longer term at least might have some question marks, like a Thomas Tatar. It's not quite clear if Tatar will be able to be re-signed in Montreal and continue on beyond the current coming season or not. So there's some question marks there. They've had a guy like Paul Byron, for example, has been missed a fair bit of time recently due to injuries. So certainly some question marks in their top 6, top 9 group, and Killorn could be a great fit. So I'd love to know what you guys think of a potential trade, especially if you cheer for the Habs. Do you think Alex Killorn would be a good fit in Montreal if the asking price wasn't more than maybe a second-round pick and a prospect or maybe a couple of mid-round picks? If that gets it done, do you make that deal? Now, lastly here, we're going to touch on the Vancouver Canucks, and we have a fair bit to talk about in Vancouver. They've been a team that's getting a lot of media attention, especially on the West Coast here in the last number of days during training camp. As we talked about a bit yesterday, we saw some reports indicating that Detroit apparently has interest in both of their goaltenders, that they might be interested in a guy like Jacob Markstrom if he's not able to be re-signed in Vancouver, or if they do sign Markstrom, the Red Wings might be very interested in going after Demko via trade. So clearly there could be some deals to be had there between the two organizations. I mean, Detroit certainly needs a goaltender, and I can understand why they would have some interest from that perspective. And as we talked about before, Detroit's also one of the few teams who could take on that Loui Eriksson contract. So clearly, maybe moving Eriksson to Detroit with a sweetener like Demko could very well be something that might happen. Of course, that's what I was talking about yesterday. But I came across some information today. It was actually posted a few days ago, but I hadn't seen it until this afternoon. Some information from Rick Dhaliwal from TSN, who covers the Canucks quite closely, talking about some other prospects that were previously garnering attention from other teams over the last while, when especially leading up to the trade deadline, when it came to any kind of Loui Eriksson discussions of what other teams wanted to have included here. I mean, obviously, the main players that were obviously asked about before were guys like Adam Gaudette or even defenseman Brogan Rafferty, and even Cole Linz had a pretty solid year. He's been garnering some attention as well. So they could also, if it's not Demko, it could be players like that could be used as a sweetener and to be included in the Loui Eriksson trade to shed themselves of that salary. As we've said before, Vancouver has had pretty good luck with a lot of their top first-round pick prospects being top players. Now some of their other depth prospects that are trying to work their way into the organization may not all have opportunities. It might make sense for them to move along one or two, especially if it means freeing up a lot of cap space and giving them the flexibility they need to keep all these other players in the fold. So that's something that would make sense. Of course, like I said, I just want to bring this up again with the fact that it's not just a guy like Demko that could get this done. There's certainly other pieces on the Canucks roster. Now, of course, the other thing with the Canucks in the past week, there's been some Jake Virtanen issues, a little bit of drama around this player, not having a great time in training camp. Looks like he's been demoted for the most part, and might even be a healthy scratch when they get to the Phase 4 bubbles and start to play hockey. It's hard to say for sure. They might put him back in the lineup, but based on what I've seen from their training camp reports, it looks as though he's kind of not getting that opportunity. Teams lost a lot of confidence, not only in his defensive play, but hasn't been playing well offensively as well. Zach McEwen seems to be getting more of an opportunity and potentially could replace him in the Canucks lineup once they get to their play-in series that they're going to be having here against the Minnesota Wild. I mean, in the recent scrimmage, of course, we saw Virtanen had struggling offensively and defensively, started getting a little careless with some hits, was yelled at by Captain Bo Horvat, which was captured on the audio, which went through the to the radio feeds as well. So obviously that was something that you don't always see, but of course you don't always have things like that happening with empty arenas and the microphones picking up all that extra language, which is something we're probably going to see as a unique feature for these upcoming 2020 NHL playoffs. With empty arenas and all kinds of microphones around, you're bound to get hearing players say things that you normally wouldn't hear on a traditional NHL broadcast. Obviously, Virtanen's Canuck teammates, like I said, they just seem to be losing confidence in his abilities right now, and clearly it could bump himself out of the lineup. Could that mean he'd be traded in the offseason? I guess maybe. I wouldn't have any speculation to say that's something that they're looking at right now. Of course, we saw the Brock Besser rumors last week, so anything's possible with this team. They're going to have to be creative to in order to make some cap space. They have some bad contracts they need to shed, and right now, there's a lot of possibilities that they need to look at and seriously consider when it comes to making room to get some deals done. If it works out that Virtanen kind of falls out of favor and a guy like McEwen kind of takes his spot, you know what? Maybe they do consider trading him in the offseason. I mean, he's going to be an RFA. He's doing new contracts, going to need a raise. And maybe they'll decide that they don't feel comfortable paying that. They'd rather move him along. Of course, he's been a bit of a lightning rod for criticism since he's been drafted. Had a hard time living up to the hype considering where he was selected so high in the first round. But he has been improving. Has looked at the stats over the last number of years. He is getting better year after year. At least he's showing some progress. So that is something. I'm not sure that the Canucks are really all that prepared to give up on him as of yet, but it's certainly interesting to note his training camp struggles, how his teammates seem to be feeling about him right now, and whether or not he gets in this lineup and has a chance to kind of redeem himself in the playoffs even. So that could impact his future as well. So let me know your thoughts on all the recent things going on with the Vancouver Canucks. What kind of prospect or players do you think they need to include to move that Loui Eriksson contract to get the flexibility they so desperately need? And do you see Virtanen getting his shot to play in the playoffs, or could he end up being a healthy scratch after everything that's gone on here recently in Canucks camp? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll continue discussing further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.